My name is Angela Grier. My Blackfoot spiritual name is Bayoksubansky, and it means singing loudly far away. It was gifted to me by my grandmother's sister when I was 14, a coming of age ceremony, and I've been working to work into that name. I am from the Piikani Nation, did I say that already? And Blackfoot Confederacy here in what's known as Southern Alberta. Our traditional territory is the western side is the edge of the Rocky Mountains up to the South Saskatchewan River by Edmonton, bordering into the Cypress Hills in the east and down into Yellowstone National Park. What's known as Yellowstone today is our southern boundary. We have one sister tribe in Montana and 3 of our First Nations of the Confederacy, which one of them is mine here in what's known as Alberta. I have been an advocate for the most part of my life. I've been working to support Indigenous people and voices in a lot of different aspects, from political, financial, executive, corporate, environmental, youth, and mental health and wellness. I am currently a registered provisional psychologist here in Alberta, and I work with the Siksika First Nation with young people there. I work here in Calgary at Brighter Psychology, and I'm also working with Susan Aglue Clark's Arctic Rose Foundation as their Indigenous mental health lead. When I'm not doing all that, I also work as the National Indigenous Lead for the Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapy Association. I have 4 beautiful children that I adore and are the center of my life, and I have a beautiful granddaughter named Meadow. What I value the most about what I do is definitely working with my communities in my traditional territory when possible, but also working with Indigenous people from across these lands, the world, and people in general. I think that as a behavioralist, I love to study behavior. I love to learn, and I love to be a transmitter of information. So I look at myself as a conduit, and I always wonder why I've been fortunate to meet certain people, be in certain places at the right time, and then down the line I realize, okay, now I know it's coming full circle. So I really look at myself as a conduit and just trying to enjoy the experiences of life. At this time in my life, I think really ramping up on the environmental aspects of being a Nititipi, being a Blackfoot person, is really near and dear to my heart. Working with people like Dr. Leroy Little Bear to amplify the bison restoration that we're doing from Yukon to Yellowstone. Working to bring the buffalo back into our territory. Working to support all of the water, sky, land beings that are our relatives. I generally work with human beings, but I find my joy within those other side of relatives. So I think with the work that I do is it's profound to see the impact on people's lives, whatever range that is, whether it's small or large. I mentioned in the panel yesterday that, I work with young people who were planning to end their life at a certain age. And when they share with me through, our ongoing therapy sessions that now they're planning for a life, that to me, that is, I cannot be more grateful for that, for them, but just to be a part of that sacred, intimate journey of connecting to human beings and making sense of this complex trauma and complex world that we've inherited. I think another thing that's really near and dear to my heart is in that conduit position, bridging our traditional knowledge systems with contemporary Western psychology, for example. Cultural practices are central to who we are. Cultural practices are land-based, and so where we're from is where we gather our medicines. We have specific animals that we hold reverence to, for example, the buffalo as Blackfoot people. So it's very land-based. So cultural involvement is really environmental involvement. And our elders have lived long lives of experience, transmitted knowledge. They are authorized knowledge keepers. In Blackfoot territory, we're very fortunate to have our culture and language still very much intact, doing the same ceremonies, singing the same songs in the same places for time immemorial. And just to be involved in that for myself as a lay person, not somebody who has all these transferred rights and authorities like other people in my life, but just a citizen. It always humbles me to stand in those teepees, say at bundle opening times, and know that I'm standing in the same atmosphere as my ancestors did, and they're singing those same songs in the same order, same way, for thousands and thousands of years. And knowing, being around the culture is the way we learn. We do have to wear several identities in this modern world. My university education is some papers that I've earned. Definitely necessary. I think education is where we need to be. But our cultural education is by far more important. I won't say equal, I'll say more, because this is what teaches us how to be human beings. In my work and research as a graduate student in psychology, I could not connect with the schools of thoughts of psychology as they were rooted in very foreign ideologies, philosophies that were outside of an Indigenous perspective. And I had to really look at what I wanted to research, what I was going to invest my time, my years in, funding, etc. And the one thing that kept coming back to me was what helped me through my darkest times in my life. And it was that smudge, it was those prayers, it was those kinship circles of people that I ride on their coattails. They're out there living and being traditional knowledge holders, and I know they pray for people like me, for like all of us. So I knew that was a source of strength that I wanted to invest in. I have been recently really trying to promote that our people, when we're looking at what's the best practice, they used to use that word back in the day. Now I think they say wise practices. To me, it's all English, it's all the same. I don't get caught up too much in those phonetics, but we're the best practice as Nitsitabi people. We've survived thousands and thousands of years of evolution, survived genocide, survived assimilative policies, survived residential school eras, survived racist leaders in Canada like Duncan Campbell Scott, who was not going to quit until there was not one Indian left. We've survived all of that. And there's not one thing you can put a finger on to say this is the answer. It's a culmination of our knowledge and our years, our ability to exist past time, what is known as time today, much older than Christianity, Christianity, the timeline of that, and the Age of Enlightenment is a drop in the bucket compared to what my ancestors have. As an example, in our bundles, there's animals in those bundles that are no longer around, they're extinct. That's how old they are. We have stories of the dinosaurs, we have stories that go so far back, of the mammoths, the giant buffaloes, the giant beavers, things that people don't cannot comprehend that we have a connection to. The people that they call the Clovis people, those were our ancestors. So we've been around for time immemorial, and what we've been doing, we must have been doing something right. And for us to, I guess, be the survival of the fittest from a Darwinian perspective, evolutionary perspective. And I really see that rooted in our spirituality and our culture. Because when things got tough, I think about stories like the Aniskim story as a Blackfoot person, the story of the buffalo rock that was given to us, the song, the teachings, which came in a time of famine, came in a time where there was no buffalo. And a woman that was very connected spiritually, like all our ancestors were, they prayed for an answer, and a vision came to her. And people didn't want to believe her, and she had to basically follow through with what the vision had said to do, which was a buffalo spirit that came to her. And if she did these things that it said, it would bestow her people to have a herd of buffalo to come through to feed them in their time of need. Despite people not believing her, because we're a people of witness, we always have to have witness and validation in our own ways. One of the instructions was to let that first buffalo come through and not to kill it, and then the rest will come. And so once the prophecy started coming true, the people, of course, believed her, followed the instructions. And that's the story of Aniskim, how it came to us, the buffalo rock. And when I think of that story, it's a story of faith, of allowing that engagement, sacred engagement between our human selves and the spirit world, to have that relationship and to be guided by that spirit world, and to be able to listen and to learn and to follow instructions and do what we have always done for thousands of years, which I'm very proud to be Blackfoot, because we have such a long legacy, and such a strong legacy, even at time of contact, being the tigers of the prairie, they called us, because we were the last to be encroached upon. The history of the Blackfoot people in Treaty 7 is the Stoney Nakoda peoples and the Tsuut'ina Dene peoples were running from refuge from America, from all different places, and we agreed to take them in and to adopt them and to let them come into our territory at the time of the beginning of colonization. And that's how they came to be here in Blackfoot territory. And so knowing our history is a part of that cultural influence, and we don't get that history unless we're sitting with our elders and we're sitting in kinship in those ceremonial circles and spaces, and showing up in a way where you're willing to listen and you're willing to carry that knowledge respectfully, not abuse it. And it just really teaches us the ethics of being human beings. And so to me, that's where everything lies. That's our ingredients for life. That's our 10 commandments, you would say, our covenants, however we would translate that into a understanding people might hear. But it lies within our stories and our songs that are ancient and beyond time. So that's the influence culture plays for me, and part of my job as a modern day Blackfoot psychologist, sometimes scholar, individual professional, is to help be a medium to translate some of those knowledge systems into Western ways of doing. And it's not easy, but we're doing it. I grew up on the reserve my whole life as a young child, and back then, it was very different. We were still camping in our teepee or our timber limits. We were still on the land very significantly. My Uncle William would provide us with elk and meat. We were very connected still, and community had cohesiveness. It was working through, of course, all their traumas. But we didn't see it as much, even though we were in trauma at the time. When we look back, we're like, wow, but because there was so many protective factors that outweighed kind of the risk factors, that was, to me, the starter for me to love my community, and to be grounded and to know the spirit of Bikani, no matter what happened down the line. For example, I held public office for my nation for 4 years, and it was difficult. There was a lot of lateral violence, and I understand it from a head part, a brain rational part. My heart didn't, though. My heart was hurt because, like I said, I grew up, I didn't have enemies like that. I didn't have experienced that kind of lateral violence as a professional until I got into politics, which I'm not going to say not to go into it, but I'm just saying you beware, be informed. But, it was all necessary. All the hardships I went through were necessary, because it's in those depths of pain, darkness, despair that we find what is important for us. We find what is going to help us get out of there. We test our own theories to get back on track. We find out who's there for us. We find out what we're made of. And they're just as necessary, just as the dark night is necessary as the day. It's all a part of nature. Some cultures call it the yin and the yang, or the contrary. It's all necessary, those difficult parts of life. It can't all be roses. That's just not nature. Even when we look at nature, right now there's fires throughout Alberta. It's a part of it. And hopefully there'll be teachings there once they're done. But, growing up on the reserve, I grew up around a lot of traditional values, growing up around people who helped each other. We had a small community back then. It was close, even despite us going into town for school, dealing with racism just outside of our reserve boundaries. We still got to come home to a safe space. I always kind of look at that like the Indigenous centers in universities, right? They have the Indigenous spaces, and you come back and you kind of take a breather, reconnect, get yourself, gathered again. Sadly, that's the reality, and we had to face those things, right? And I remember going through physical assaults by teachers in our schools. And they weren't day schools, but they were, they were harsh. I won't say they were just as harsh, but they were harsh. We went through our stuff too. And I feel for kids today because they're still going through things. The kids I counsel tell me about stuff all the time. So I think a lot of that contributed to a lot of trauma. Of course, my parents were residential school survivors. My grandparents all were residential school survivors. We inherited the intergenerational trauma, the challenges with addictions, all of those things that hurt a human being when they have their natural displacement, their spiritual displacement. I was never, really raised as a Christian. My mom was very open. As a residential school survivor, she would attend church at certain times of the year, like Christmas Mass, and it was kind of a time to go and hang out and eat, and but we were never really churchgoers. And a part of me is thankful for that, because I didn't have that indoctrination. It kept me like a blank canvas. But naturally, as a human being does, as you get older, you start to look at a spiritual care, because ultimately we're just spirits in a human form. Our spirits go on, the human form does not. So when the time was right and, the path was set, I walked into those worlds to learn about our traditional ways, and it was life-changing for me. That was the ingredients that made me bulletproof, that gave me the pride, gave me an understanding of who I was, because I was learning my history, I was learning the beauty of our people, I was learning so much about our world that goes much past, the linear worldviews of the Western world or the church. It was all encompassing. I don't think I would have ever identified with the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. I look at, our teachings are the sky, the land, and the water beings. Those all encompass our deities. And we don't have a single deity. We have multiple universal relatives that we call in for help. So to me, that was a very natural way of thinking that I could understand and internalize. It made sense to me, still does. My ancestors have been thinking that way for time immemorial. So like I said earlier, whatever they've been doing, it must have been right. And so I've always been a bit of a social justice warrior, being young and angsty on the reserve and not really having those outlets. I had a tumultuous adolescence. I was kicked out of school in grade 12. And I went through a lot of addictions as an adolescent. I was very lost, very hurt with what I was recovering from as a child. And it took me having my son, Alex, when I was 18, that I always say he saved my life and he made me the person I am today. And I know all my kids will be like, Mom, how could you put Alex above the rest of us? And I'm not putting him above the rest, but he made me a mom. And I knew that I was not going to let him go through certain things. And I was not going to raise my children with some of the things that I went through. And I don't blame my mom at all. She did the best she could and made me the woman that I am today. And she's passed on much too early. And I believe it's from the toxic stress she lived with as a residential school survivor and a survivor of the reserve system, of racism. We don't get to be elders all the time. So we're having a hard time living long. So I know she was gone before her time. So I also had to face that, losing my mom when I was 34. And having my children, they're the driving force that make me work hard every day. They're the real bosses, I always say. They, what they need, I have to provide. I'm a single parent by choice. I needed to raise my children in a home that was safe and healthy and, emotionally safe. And that's just the way it was. So I look at all of the tough times I went through growing up. They kind of shifted as I started going to school, going to college, university. Took me a long time to get through that. I took my time, and I always share that with young people and anyone. Doesn't matter if you want to go to school when you're 50, 60, go for it, right? Like, what's the race? Learning is amazing. I miss school. If I could be a student for life, I would. I loved university. I loved being able to, kind of be able to go to class and learn for a living. And as First Nation people, status Indians, some of us are fortunate to get funding to go to school. So to me, I thought it was just incredible to live that life. And I didn't do great in high school. I did not do well. I didn't think I could even go to university. It was my mother who continued to push me and get me to go, and she never gave up. And once I got into my graduate studies, I was like this A student, and I'm like, what? I almost made the dean's list, almost made honors, but just a couple decimals short, or a couple, just fractions. But I didn't know what I had. I didn't know what I could do. It took me a long time to realize that I had some empowerment. I had some power, personal power. And it was the trauma, it was the doubt, it was the hurt that held me back from being able to kind of catapult myself into that place of personal empowerment and belief. But it was my culture that gave me that bulletproof vest, that bulletproof shell that told me no matter, what, you're just as equal as anybody else. So working with from those perspectives, from a culminated perspective of cultural, traditional knowledge systems, integrating spirit, integrating trauma-informed lens, artistic. I really support our artists. I think we're so gifted. I think that it's all of these aspects that have shaped me are now they're making sense. Now it's all coming to kind of this tipping point for me as to why I went through certain things. So in terms of the cultural influence, culture is everything. We haven't gotten to the point where we're writing the curriculums yet, or we're within the regulatory associations that govern mental health practitioners. We're not at those points yet, but we're getting there. We're coming, right? And I think it's time that doors have been open for us. I always am so grateful to the TRC looking at our residential school survivors. They kicked that door open for us. They did it. We owe them all of the homage for making the change and implementing the TRC. They fought the civil suit against the federal government. The federal government lost against our survivors. Our survivors stood up for us, and they've changed this country. And I'm so grateful, and that's a part of me wearing this pin today, in support of those who can't speak or aren't here to speak, or who never had a voice. It's a responsibility that we all carry as Nitsitabi to use our voice and use it responsibly and respectfully, and to work to have informed decision making in our politics and in leadership, in every facet of our experience of life, from political to financial. We have to be a part of all of those conversations to inform it. It's fiscally responsible for governments to engage with Indigenous people, because if they don't, they're going to have to later. We stop pipelines. We've got a lot of power. We've got a lot of flex, and we're using it. And I'm so proud. I'm so proud to be Indigenous. And I'm so proud of our young people and our old people, all our people. I would never want to be anything else. I'm proud of the blood I come from, and I'm proud of the color of my skin. I wear it like a badge of honor. In terms of connecting to culture, understanding culture, it's really, there's that saying that, I don't know where it came from, but do in Rome as the Romans do. Know who's in your backyard. So just like when I'm in Cree territory, I'm not going to assert my Blackfoot spirituality or customs. I'm going to respect the local protocol, because again, our cultures are land-based. So it's when I'm in a different land, I don't know the animals, the stories, the land's voice. I don't know the stories of the land that shaped the people. It's up to them to lead those discussions. So know who's in your backyard. It always amazes me. I've worked in so many disciplines, and I remember working in upholding children's rights out of the Child Advocate Office here in Alberta, an independent legislative office of the province. And we went down into Lethbridge as an example, and we're doing a file review, and we're trying to find out where the breakage happened, why this child was in a certain situation, and we were working with the ministry's office. So it wasn't the on reserve DFNA, it was the ministry in Lethbridge under the province. And their answer was, well, I sent an email and I tried to call. And I just was boggled. I said, after all these years of these local DFNAs, these local First Nations, trying to work with these ministerial offices, it was a one-way conversation. It wasn't a reciprocal. So we would have to go into their offices. We would have to go into their spaces in their legislative buildings and meet on their turf, right? Which was in our territory. It was never the opposite of, hey, we're gonna come out and we're gonna take us on a tour of your community, show us important pieces of land, tell us what's important to you, how do you want us to see you? There was none of that. And the fact that it was done through a phone call or an email was just so archaic to me, because I'm a person who, I'm very hands-on. If I can't get through, I'm gonna go physically and get through. I'm gonna get business taken care of. That's our way of doing, and it's often done in person. So the fact that we had these fresh out of university social workers terrified to go on the res, with all the unconscious bias or conscious bias in this case, all of these thoughts of them being unsafe to go out to the DFNA on the reserve, all of those preconceived notions, I was just so dumbfounded that in not long ago, I won't say when, but less than around 5 years, ish, that this was still taking place in the era of TRC. And it was very difficult for me to fathom that, to think we're still there, right? We're still in this portraying Indigenous people as savages, as uncivilized, as dangerous, all those types of things. And it was hurtful because our children ultimately suffered, the ones who were in care. They were not connected to their communities. They were dislocated. They were away from their traditional lands, their spiritual guardians, all of those types of things. So it was tough to see that personal, non-informed decision making was going to ultimately affect the person that they were supposed to be working for. And that's why I say, just as I had to go to school, I had to get a degree, I had to get a master's, I had to go through provincial regulation to become a psychologist. Well, that is a privilege that other people have, but what about doing that extra cultural competency to make sure informed decision making is met and done at all levels, despite somebody's personal kind of stance on things or their struggle with racism? Because ultimately, if they have that, then they shouldn't be in those businesses, right? They shouldn't be working with Indigenous people. This is why we need Indigenous people in droves moving into mainstream industry. We just had a speaker today saying we need Indigenous people in the federal government, and that's kind of like, but we need it. I get it. It's not easy to work in those bureaucratic systems, but it's necessary. We need to decolonize these structures. We need to bring Indigenous voices and spaces in at any cost, like yesterday, because people's lives are on the line. I work with it every day. I hear the stories of our people struggling with these systems and not getting basic needs met. We have so many murders that take place, and injustice of our people who don't get the same justice as, somebody who's non-Indigenous. The structures are designed for Western Euro-centric populations. They were never designed for people of color. They were never designed for Indigenous people. That has to change. And so it takes everybody to kind of step up and be responsible. Be responsible to do their due diligence, just like I had to go to school for so many years. We're just asking people to make connections in their own backyards. Start with your traditional territory. Start with getting to know who's who. We have to stop with the pan-Indigenous approaches. Like I said, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. When in Blackfoot territory, follow Blackfoot protocol. When in Cree, when in Ojibwe, when in Saulteaux, when in, Haudenosaunee, Salish, all sorts of these wonderful, diverse communities. Respect that. It's no different than us sending corporate people to Japan. They research the culture first before they go in so they don't make mistakes and they have good relations. That's no different. If they can't do that here in Canada, that means that they look at our people as subhuman. We're not worth it. So we have to really start calling this behavior out and being accountable, because these people who are upholding racist rhetoric are in positions of power. Do they deserve to hold that power if they cannot uphold public safety? Are they making informed decisions and having inclusion in those decisions, or are they operating from an isolated, linear, kind of narrow-minded perspective? So that's what we have to start holding our institutions and our leadership accountable, because the amount of fiscal irresponsibility that comes out of that, the amount of lawsuits that are currently going on with First Nation Indigenous people against Canada, the provinces, is unbelievable. And we don't lose at Supreme Court because our rights are entrenched in the Constitution. We know our law. I always say that Canadian politicians often don't know their law, because if they did, they wouldn't be so irresponsible in making certain uninformed decisions. I think my advice to the non-Indigenous folks is, the education is subpar right now. It's not at a level of, we're a first world, but our education is very linear. It's not diverse and encompassing. We're not leading in science for a reason. India, China, these countries lead in science because they're inclusive of their traditional knowledge and of women in that, like, STEM industry, for example. So we have a lot to learn from other cultures. We're learning that European descent is a minority, a global minority, but it acts like a global majority. It's a global minority. The global majority is people of color, Indigenous people. So I think now with technology, that's really shifting. I love social media in its connection and getting people connected. But just to speak to those who are disconnected from the culture or who have been displaced, it's a lifetime journey, I would anticipate, that I've saw with people I've worked with. Young people in the foster care system, for example, which is a continuation of destruction of Indigenous families that started with residential schools, 60s scoop, now it's foster care. It's this continuation of racist policy that is meant to tear our heart and our core apart, which is our families. But you have families, you have connections to bloodlines. It may take a little bit of research, but we do it all the time. If you can get that first understanding of your kind of First Nation background of, am I Cree, am I Haudenosaunee, am I Mohawk, whatever the case may be. Start there, right? And then get a little bit deeper into connecting. And as soon as you connect to, you may have to talk to a lot of people in those communities, in that land base, but somebody will know. Somebody will remember. They'll say, yes, we remember your family. We remember this, we remember that. And it's a very intentional and spiritual journey. And we believe that what you put attention to will flourish. And so I really believe in that spirit of that journey, that if somebody wants to be found, they will. And even if you don't connect to your original roots, we have so many kinship circles. We have so much custom adoption in our communities for a reason. We adopt all sorts of people into our way of life. We even have non-Indigenous people in sacred societies in Blackfoot territory, which demonstrates that we don't push people away. When somebody wants to come in, our traditional values are very inclusive. It's about love and compassion. We have empathy for each other. We really try to understand what that person's going through. And that's why I think I've been really connected to psychology and a cultural standpoint, because they're very much in line with each other, about how to be a good therapist, to be approachable and compassionate and warm. I'm not a clinical, I don't have a clinical identity. If I ever do, I don't know who or what I would be, but that's not how we connect as human beings. I really feel deep connection with my clients at a human, empathetic level. It takes its toll, but that's what gets through to people, and that's what keeps people connected in the healing journey, to feel safe. So I do believe that there's an intention. If you put it out there, it will come. All nations that I've ever known, any First Nation peoples, are very much, we will adopt you. You need a grandma? We'll find you a grandma, right? I was called auntie this week at this conference. Okay, I'll be your auntie. We have brothers and sisters that are not related to us. I have parents right now who have no bloodline to me, but they're my parents. They're my mom and my dad. And I'm thankful I had them, because when my mother, my biological mother, left this world, I still had those to take care of me. Thank God, So there's lots of ways to make connections, and I really am not a fan of pan-Indigenous approaches. I know they're a gateway to kind of get comfortable in certain settings, cultural, respectful, sacred settings. But I do know that we have to push to go further, because the cultures are very specific and they have lots of teaching. Native science, for example, you want roots, you want medicines. Well, there's songs and territory it goes with. They don't come without each other, right? It's like a periodic table. You have to do this, this, and that to get this outcome. So I think that we have to get a little bit more specific and push. We have a lot of kids coming out of loss, being not connected to their ways of life. And I don't believe we're doing a great service of bringing in cultural confusion. I think that we need to teach our cultures the way they've been always taught, because that's how they were given to us. There's a lot of cutting corners nowadays. There's a lot of just add water, instant medicine men, holy men, and that can be dangerous. It's because our communities validate those people. Our communities hold them accountable and police them and govern each other. So we really have to make sure it's specific to those protocols in those lands. So what I'm hopeful for future generations is, again, I'm just a step in the long road. I don't, if we ever start thinking we're bigger than we are, then we get imbalanced. So I have to remember that I am just very small in this universe, and operate from that perspective that I have a tiny role. I'm not going to fix the world. I'm not going to find the answers to everything. That's too big of a responsibility to carry. So I think as humans, my message would be, don't put that pressure on yourself. Focus on what you're good at. Focus on what you're naturally connected to. Follow the road that where life takes you, and honor yourself in what you know and the skills that you have and the teachings you have to do that. I think that one of my hopes is that I get to be involved with, certain healing of people that I'm brought to. Creation brings us together, and those people are going to go and do amazing things. I'm like, wow, they already are. And I think of one of my clients in Siksika. She's a brilliant. We're working through her healing that is holding her back from going into post-secondary, but she's going to be a brilliant scientist someday, and that gets me so excited. I have kids now who tell me, I want to be a psychologist. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so cool, because we need so many psychologists, native psychologists. I think I'm just a helper. I'm just here to give my energy into things and people that come my way, or ask for my support or ask for my help. And their gifts will come. So we have to kind of get past the trauma. We have to stabilize, have emotional regulation, all that stuff. I'm not going to get into all that counseling stuff, but we have to have that balance of self, so we can get to what's really good, which is the good stuff inside of us, the good, the ugly, everything, because it all makes up who we are. I work with warriors. I work with young people who are surviving the most horrific environments, the most difficult lives, families, the opioid crisis that's orphaning kids every day. I have youth who have had to bring other youth back to life with the Narcan. These are war fields. They're surviving. And for me, just to have a little bit of an influence in that, I'm so honored every day. I'm so blessed to be where I am, to be a helper, because that's all we are, is to help each other. That's it. That's nothing more complicated than that. We're just all helpers from our traditional value systems. And so if I can support people to move past a hopeless place, into a place of thriving, not just surviving, then I've done my job. I also get to be a mother. I get to put myself into these 4 beautiful human beings that I've been gifted, and just, watch them grow and see what they do. They amaze me all the time. Like I said, they're all so incredible. And I kind of live through them sometimes, because I had to grow up pretty fast. So became a mom young. So I make sure that they just have this youth and childhood and fun. And, they've just shown me all their wonderful life source of them. In doing that, that makes me happy. I enjoy making people happy. I know the boundaries of that, though. But it makes me happy because I've been blessed. I've been blessed with certain things and privileges. I don't take that for granted. I was raised in the community to always know what was going on, the hardships, our poverty, our systemic poverty, our situated vulnerability. We're not vulnerable people by nature. We are situated to be vulnerable. We are actually very, what's the word? I don't like that word, resilient. We're natural. We have a natural strength that keeps us alive to get past all of the odds, to get past all the odds. So we're very special. We're very special. And I think once we get into different disciplines, the medicine field, justice, law, all of these fields, and we saturate and have our capacity in there, we're going to change the world, right? We're a first world, so we have a lot of influence on the world. You look at Maslow. Maslow came and learned from the Blackfoot people and built a whole school of thought on that. How many know about that appropriated knowledge? Carl Jung, one of the great psychologists, Sigmund Freud, they all had roots in appropriating indigenous knowledges through their career. They've changed the world through psychology. So we've already had that influence. Now we just need to get referenced and cited for it, which is something I'm very big on. That's these ethical, aspects in the academia. So I think that we have a lot of work to do. We need our people to be healthy. We need soldiers. We need, we need helpers. And my journey is healing. And I didn't always want that. It was hard. It's not easy, but I really love what I do now. And I feel very grateful just to be able to be in those conversations and sit with elders and learn. And they teach me all the time. They are like onions. They just layers and layers, and I can't take it. I'm like, stop, you're blowing my mind. You're turning me inside out. All of my knowledge comes from our people. Everywhere I go, and people, you're calling me a unicorn. I'm like, well, that's Bikani. That's Siksagay Titabi. That's all of these people who shaped this woman right here. So I know it's not about me. And I'm just a tiny little grain of sand in all of this. So we keep ourselves small so we don't get hurt. We don't hurt others. But we also, when we have to go big, we go big and we go hard. And so it's a balance. It's a balance. We got to all figure out what that is for ourselves.